No one paid attention to her when she walked by with the bucket and the rag. It was as if the gray uniform she wore had the power to erase her. And for a long time, she believed she truly had no color. But everything changed the day she realized she could turn the dust she cleaned into invisible steps towards something much greater. Even if the world said otherwise, the factory was too big for her dreams to fit inside. Among the hallways filled with boxes and the damp locker rooms she swept every day, there was a silence that hurt more than any rejection, the silence of being ignored. But there was also an echo inside her, something that kept insisting, "You haven't reached where you're meant to be." The production lines at Adidas were precise, rhythmic, almost cold. She moved between them with her broom, always avoiding glances, trying not to draw attention. But inside, every piece of fabric she saw, every pair of shoes she packed, was a planted seed. Not of revolt, but of imagination. She observed more than she cleaned. She noticed the cuts, the prints, the details of each piece. What for many was just another day of work, for her was a class. A class in design, in business, in human behavior. It was as if the factory hallways hid a secret studio, one only she could see. Some laughed at her for keeping leftover scraps, discarded tags, old catalogs thrown in the trash. But she didn't care. That wasn't garbage. It was inspiration, disguised as waste. And when she got home, she glued everything into an old notebook, as if sketching a future still invisible. On days she was called to clean the executive offices, she saw the campaigns on the walls. Famous models, vibrant colors, slogans that seemed to shout to the world. And she would ask herself, what if one day it's my brand up there? But soon came the voice of doubt, whispering in her ear, "Don't fool yourself, you're just the cleaning lady." She learned to live with that voice. She didn't silence it, she challenged it. And each time someone treated her as invisible, she mentally noted, "This will become fuel." Some nights, she cried alone in the small room where she lived. The physical exhaustion was bearable. The emotional, not so much. She felt that no one truly saw her. That no matter how hard she tried, she would always be the cleaning girl. But instead of drowning in that feeling, she decided to build something in silence, without fanfare, without expectation. Only with faith. She began hand-sketching the designs she imagined during work. At first, they looked childish. But over time, she developed her own style. She stole minutes during breaks to sketch, slept late, woke up early. And even without knowing, she was shaping the woman who would one day take over the fashion world. It all started with a notebook and a desire. She bought cheap fabrics from store backrooms and sewed by hand. She made her first piece with the help of a free tutorial. It wasn't perfect, but it was the first time she wore something created by herself. And that changed everything. For the first time, she felt like the author of her own story. She still cleaned bathrooms, still scrubbed floors. But now she did it with a different posture, because she knew that reality was temporary, that her mission was bigger than the walls Adidas could contain. Some colleagues said she was dreaming too much, that the fashion world was cruel, elitist, unreachable. But she just smiled and replied, "The floor is hard too, and yet I walk on it every day." She started selling her pieces online, secretly. She was ashamed to say she was the one who made them, afraid of being judged. But the first sales came, small, timid. And with each one, the certainty grew inside her. It's possible. She remained at Adidas, still cleaning, carrying, organizing. But now, the eyes that once avoided contact were firmer, because they knew where they came from, and more importantly, where they were going. The hardest part wasn't sewing. It was keeping her heart strong on the days when everything felt pointless. On days when no piece sold, when the looks of contempt weighed more than the boxes. But on those days, she reminded herself, I can't go back to where I started. 1. Day, while cleaning a meeting room, she overheard directors talking about new talents. One of them said, "No one is born a designer, you have to grind hard." She looked at the floor she was scrubbing and thought, "Then I'm on the right path." She didn't want to be famous. She wanted to be free, free to create, to decide, to be respected. Free to see her brand on the streets, on runways, in the eyes of those who wore it with pride. She started receiving larger orders. An influencer wore one of her pieces. A store reached out. And little by little, the invisible cleaning girl began to be seen, not for what she cleaned, but for what she created. Even so, she didn't immediately quit her job at Adidas. She knew that before walking out that door, she needed to leave complete on the inside, without anger, without resentment, only with gratitude. She never spit on the floor she once swept. On the contrary, she knew that every meter she cleaned there prepared her to step onto the right stage at the right moment. And that moment came, with spotlights, with applause, with tears. The brand that was born in silence, among old cloths and rejection, now crossed international runways. And she, standing backstage, simply smiled, because she knew all of that had a cost. And she paid it, in sweat, in faith, in resilience. Now that you've heard the beginning of this journey, do you still think your origin defines your destiny? Comment below. What are you doing today that could become your turning point tomorrow? Someone might ignore what you carry, but when you decide not to dim your light, the whole world will have no choice but to see you. The routine remained the same. The alarm rang before the sun came up. The uniform was always the same, and the badge still read third-party service. But something inside her had changed. She no longer walked with her eyes on the floor. She walked like someone who knew she carried something bigger than it seemed. Even so, the tests kept coming. A demanding customer spilled coffee on the floor and asked her to clean it more carefully. She took a deep breath, knelt down, and cleaned. Not because she felt smaller, but because she knew that didn't define her. She knew that even the act of cleaning could be a rehearsal in dignity. She kept sewing at night. Her fingers ached, her back was sore. But each stitch was like a silent scream saying, "I'm still here." Some pieces didn't turn out well. Some orders were returned, but she didn't stop. Because she had learned to respect the process, not just the outcome. She began saving every penny. She stopped buying unnecessary things, sold what she no longer used, turned down invitations to go out. Every bit of money earned outside of work hours was kept in envelopes. One for materials, another for marketing, another for the dream. Day, an order came from outside the country. It was small, but she cried while packing it. That shipping label meant much more than distance. It meant her art was crossing borders. While she still crossed hallways in silence, she began studying branding on her own. Borrowed books, watched videos, wrote down quotes in old notebooks. She knew being good wasn't enough. She had to learn how to communicate, how to position her brand. And once again, she made the night her teacher, someone from the Adidas team, mentioned. Seeing a piece similar to one she wore, she just smiled. Because it was hers. The stitching, the design, the idea. And in that smile was the courage of someone who knows that anonymity is sometimes the incubator of greatness, but not everything was a win. A whole week without a single sale nearly made her quit. She began to doubt herself. Thought maybe she was fooling herself. Maybe the fashion world wasn't a place for someone like her. But then she remembered where she was, and where she had already come from. She sat on the floor of her small, makeshift studio and took a deep breath. Remembered the first sketch, the first crooked cut, the first sincere compliment. It was little, but it was real. And that was enough to continue. One day, while cleaning a training room, she saw a group discussing trends. One of them said, "No. One wants to see brands without soul anymore." And she wrote that phrase down like someone receiving a revelation. Because if her brand had anything, it was soul. She began sewing with more intention. Each piece now carried a story. A pain turned into thread, a failure turned into fabric, a new beginning printed. It was more than clothing. It was identity. She started receiving messages from clients who cried when they wore her creations. They said they felt seen, represented, empowered. And each of those messages was like another brick in the invisible building she was constructing. There were days when she gave up comfort to invest more in materials, slept on the floor, ate less, took extra cleaning jobs. But she knew the discomfort of persistence was better than the prison of regret. Adidas was still her starting point. She still walked the same hallways, still scrubbed the same floors. But now, something inside her was growing so fast that no structure seemed able to contain it. She started dreaming of fashion shows. Not as a spectator, but as the author. She imagined the lights, the sound, the models wearing her creations. She could smell the new fabric, hear the applause in silence. As if rehearsing for what was yet to come, she decided she wouldn't lie about her origin. When she got there, she would tell exactly where she came from, with pride. Because the dirty cloth that cleaned floors also cleared her vision of what truly matters. She created a simple logo. Hand-drawn, scanned with an old phone. It was rough, but it had life, and she placed it on every piece with care. It was the signature of the woman who no longer wanted to be invisible. She sent proposals to small independent fashion shows. Some didn't even respond. Others said, "We're not interested." But one replied, just one. And that was enough. She prepared each piece by hand, didn't sleep. Cut, sewed, tested. Cried from nerves. But she showed up, took everything alone. Set up the rack, organized the space, and stood there, watching her first collection be seen by strangers. What she saw in the eyes of some people at that event, she would never forget. It wasn't about beauty. It was about connection. About wearing pain, overcoming, and rebirth. About turning scars into style. At the end of that day, a photographer asked to borrow a piece for a photo shoot. She agreed, not knowing if it would ever come back, but it did. And that image made its way around. It didn't go viral, but it reached the right person. Days later, an international contact. A proposal, an invitation, and she froze. Thought about saying no, thinking she wasn't ready. But then she remembered the cold nights, the dirty floor, the calloused hands. And she answered with courage, yes. Life was beginning to change. Still slowly, still with fear. But the change was now visible. New clients, invitations, recognition. And even so, she kept her feet on the ground. The same ground she once cleaned in silence. She built a small team with other women who also came from the bottom. She wanted each stitch to carry not just skill, but story. She wanted to grow without forgetting. And even with everything happening, she still stopped to clean her own workspace. Not for lack of staff, but out of respect for her roots. Because she knew, if you forget where you came from, you lose the power of where you are. The pieces now crossed oceans. The photos came from places she couldn't even pronounce. But each new achievement was received with the same feeling, gratitude and responsibility. Her brand began to draw the attention of big names. And with a pounding heart, she kept saying, yes, it's really me. I started in cleaning at Adidas. The phone rang. It was an official invitation to take part in an international fashion show. All expenses paid, with spotlight, with press. She cried in silence, then smiled, then sewed. And you? What would you do if the world finally saw you, but you still doubted yourself? The plane took off before she could fully understand what was happening. Through the window, she saw the city lights fade and felt that something inside her was detaching too. It wasn't fear of heights, it was the weight of doubt trying to scream louder than the certainty that she deserved to be there. During the flight, she reread the invitation email for the 10th time. She still thought it was a mistake, that someone would recognize her upon landing and say there had been an error. But when she arrived, she was greeted with a badge on her chest and her name printed next to a word she once thought she would never deserve: Creator. The hotel was elegant. The walls seemed made for another kind of people. She walked slowly through the hallways, as if apologizing for occupying the space she had always been told wasn't hers. But it wasn't humility, it was memory. The memory of when she used to clean hallways like those without being noticed. In the room, she cried alone. Not because of the beauty of the place, but because of everything she had to swallow to get there. She cried for the time she was ignored, for the clothes she wore in shame, for the ideas that were shelved before even being heard. The fashion show would take place in 2 days. She was entitled to an entry, a quick presentation, and a space to display her collection. It was everything she had always dreamed of, and at the same time, everything that scared her the most, because no one there knew where she came from. And suddenly, being accepted for having succeeded seemed even harder. In the event room, models rehearsed, lights were tested, everything smelled of meticulously calculated perfection. And she, holding her folded creations with care, seemed out of place in that sleek and elegant universe. But that was exactly why she was there, to break the mold. One of the organizers looked at her pieces and hesitated, said the finishing was raw, that maybe it didn't match the event's aesthetic. She swallowed hard, smiled respectfully, and replied, "It wasn't made to match, it was made to make an impact." That night, she didn't sleep. She sewed details, adjusted fits, reinforced tags, but above all, she prepared her heart. Because it wasn't enough to be ready on the outside. She needed to be strong on the inside. The day arrived. She woke up early, dressed calmly, and came down with her creations in her arms. There was no audience yet, but she already felt the eyes around her, eyes that didn't know about the factory, the broom, the dirty floor. But she knew, and that was enough. Her presentation was scheduled for the late afternoon. While she waited, she watched other brands being praised, designers being embraced, flashes going off. She felt like running away. Thought maybe it wasn't the right moment. But then she remembered, the right moments don't come. We build them. She stepped onto the stage with measured but firm steps. The lights were a bit blinding. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. And then, her collection walked. The first model entered, then another, and another. The colors were deep. The fabrics had real texture. There was a scar in every fold. There was history, pain, overcoming. People looked at each other, some confused, others moved. But no one was indifferent. At the end of the show, there were no shouts. There was silence, the kind of silence that precedes something important. And then, the applause began, first timid, then intense. Then standing. She stood there, eyes welling up, holding the microphone, not knowing what to say. They told her she could say a few words. She just took a deep breath and said, "This collection was made with hands that once could only clean what others had dirtied." When she stepped off the stage, she was surrounded, congratulated, photographed. They asked about her background. She said with pride, "I started at Adidas as a cleaning assistant." And in that moment, there was no shame. There was impact. Days later, her inbox was full. Invitations, interviews, partnership requests. And along with all that came the looks that once were disdain. Now they were admiration disguised as curiosity. But she knew she couldn't get lost in that. Vanity was a dangerous trap. She decided to keep the same focus, to keep growing with roots. She returned home with a light heart and a full suitcase. Not just with clothes, but with achievements no one could take away. And the most symbolic thing, was seeing, upon landing, an Adidas ad at the airport. She looked at it and smiled. Not out of resentment, but out of completeness. She used part of the money she earned to set up a better studio, invited other women with similar stories. Women who, like her, had been reduced to roles and not to potential. There, they created, sewed, talked, and cried together. It was more than a team, it was a collective rebirth. A silent cry against everything that had tried to erase them. Her brand began to appear in editorials, catalogs, storefronts. But more important than the aesthetics was the essence. Each client who wore one of her pieces also wore a message. You don't need to be born ready to win. You just need not to give up. One day, she received a call from a young designer saying, "I saw your show and started believing again that it's possible." She hung up in silence, but inside something bloomed. Because right then, she understood. Her fight wasn't just about her. The journey that began with a mop had now become a source of inspiration. And that responsibility was her new mission. Over time, she was recognized by major magazines, received awards, was invited to events. But even so, she preferred to work in slippers at the studio than in heels on the red carpet. Because she knew that the shine of fame wasn't worth more than the peace of being true to who you are. And even now, with everything happening, she still walked into Adidas alone. No longer as an employee, but as a guest. And every time she passed the hallway she once cleaned, she took a deep breath. Because there, on that floor, she learned to lift her eyes. And you? What are you still cleaning today that might, tomorrow, sustain your own brand? The invitation to return to Adidas didn't come by chance. It was a private event, focused on innovation and inclusion. And they wanted to hear stories from people who had turned limits into possibilities. She thought for days before accepting. Not out of pride, but because she knew going back would be too emotional. When she arrived, many didn't recognize her. After all, she looked different now. The gaze was the same, but there was a new kind of silence. The silence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Someone who succeeded through consistency, not spectacle. She was received formally. Some still looked at her with the same expression as before, but now with strangeness, not superiority. As if trying to understand how that elegant woman had emerged from the girl who once scrubbed the floors. During her speech, she didn't romanticize the pain. She told it exactly how it was. Hard, unfair, lonely. But she also spoke about the value of continuing even without encouragement. And when she finished, there was applause. But what marked her most was the silence before it. The kind of silence that comes from someone who's been pierced by truth. After the event, one of the company's leaders came to her and asked, "Why did you never tell us you had that kind of talent?" She smiled respectfully and answered, "Because I didn't think you would listen." That answer echoed more than any campaign. Because she wasn't just talking about fashion, she was talking about invisibility, ignored potential, and the voices silenced behind the scenes of big structures. Her story began to circulate within the company itself. Former co-workers remembered her. Some apologized, others just stood in silence. And she held no grudge, only memories. At the studio, things kept growing. There was now a waiting list for some pieces. Production increased, so did the social impact. But she insisted on maintaining the essence. Each piece was a narrative. She wasn't sewing fabric, she was sewing a journey. Young people began seeking her out for guidance. People afraid to start. People who believed they didn't have the right profile to succeed. She listened to everyone carefully. Because she knew what it was like to have big ideas and a small voice. She created a training project. Not just to teach how to sew, but to teach how to believe. Because she knew that talent without courage doesn't go far. And courage, sometimes, is born from example. She appeared on television, participated in panels, wrote articles, But she never traded truth for glamour. Because she didn't want to become an icon, she wanted to be a tool. A possible mirror for those who never saw themselves anywhere. Some people tried to convince her to sell her brand to a large group. The offer was worth millions. But she refused. She said her greatest profit was seeing other women rediscover themselves through what she built. In the midst of all this, she went through crises too. Financial problems, delays, production failures. She cried alone, thought about giving up. But she remembered the days when all she had was a mop and a night shift, and kept going. Because giving up now would be betraying everything she had overcome. She was invited to represent her brand at a prestigious international fashion show. This time, not as a revelation, but as a reference. Seeing her name in the catalog next to established brands, she understood that the improbable is only what no one had the courage to attempt. At that event, she shared the stage with industry giants. And when asked about her background, she answered firmly, "I taught myself among boxes, mops, and catalogs thrown in the trash." And no one dared laugh. The press was captivated by her story. It wasn't just about fashion, it was about resilience. The articles didn't talk about fabrics, they talked about the soul behind the pieces. And she knew she had finally achieved the hardest thing, being heard. The brand became a symbol of more than just style. It became a symbol of reconstruction, of voice, of path. Each tag sewn there was also a reminder, you can be more than they said you would. She bought a small headquarters for the studio. At the entrance, a phrase painted on the wall, "There is still beauty in what was once discarded." It became the team's motto, their breath on difficult days. The reminder that everything can be remade. In a marketing campaign, she refused to use standard models. She used real women with striking stories and deep eyes. And the campaign went viral. Because the world was already tired of fake perfection, she received entrepreneurship awards, was honored by universities. But she never considered herself a businesswoman. She preferred to be called resilient. Because what made her brand bloom wasn't capital, it was purpose. In a moment of pause, she returned to the Adidas factory as a visitor, walked the same corridors, sat on the bench where she used to cry during breaks, placed her hand on the wall and gave thanks. Not because she liked what she lived through there, but because all of it had been necessary. She made a documentary telling her journey. Not to brag, but to reach people who are today exactly where she once was. Because she knew, if someone had told her that story at the beginning, maybe she would have believed sooner. And at the last fashion show she participated in, while her collection walked the runway, she didn't look at the audience. She looked at the backstage, at the seamstresses, at the assistants, at the invisible women who were now beginning to see themselves. It was no longer about clothes. It was about legacy. It was about tearing silence with needle and thread. About giving color back to those who only knew faded tones. About sewing. Not just garments, but bridges, and you. Do you have any idea how many stories are hidden behind a uniform the world insists on ignoring? The studio was quiet that morning. It wasn't a silence of emptiness, it was a silence of reverence. The racks were organized, the fabrics aligned, the machine still for a moment. She entered slowly, with a folder in her hands and a gaze full of memories. That would be a different morning. Not because of a show or an important order, but because, after so many years, she had decided to tell her story. In full, she sat in front of the camera, took a deep breath, and opened the old notebook. The very one that had once been filled with scraps collected from the Adidas trash bin. The drawings were still there, faded, childish, but carrying a glow that time had never been able to erase. She flipped through it slowly, like someone rereading their own soul with teary eyes. On the wall behind her, there was a simple frame. Inside, the uniform she once wore to clean the factory hallways. It was more than fabric. It was a relic. A symbol of where everything began. A daily reminder that it's possible to bloom even in the hardest ground. She began to speak. The camera was rolling, but it felt like she was talking to the younger version of herself. The one who walked with her head down, afraid to dream. She said it had been hard. That she had thought about giving up many times. That she had cried. In cold bathrooms. But even then, even on the worst days, something inside her whispered, "Keep going." She spoke about the day she couldn't pay rent. About the night she sewed with wounded hands. About the judgment of others. About the closed doors. But she also spoke about the first client who smiled with pride. About the first international order. About the first show. And most importantly, about the first time she looked in the mirror and saw herself as strong. As she spoke, the team around her was moved. No one saw just a successful designer anymore. They saw a whole woman, forged in rejection, shaped in silence, crowned by resilience. Her story reached the world. But she made a point in every interview of remembering where she came from. Because the world has a habit of glamorizing success and erasing the pain that built it. And she refused to be just another sanitized narrative. She was truth. At the entrance of the studio, there was a hand-embroidered rug. On it was written, "Those who have cleaned floors never step on anyone." It was the phrase she repeated most to her team. And it was also the principle that guided every decision. She received invitations to write books, give lectures, sign collaborations with major brands. And she accepted, as long as she didn't have to dilute her truth. She preferred to miss opportunities than lose her essence. One day, she visited a public school to speak to young people. She told her story. Many listened in silence. At the end, a girl raised her hand and asked, "Aren't you ashamed to say you used to clean?" She smiled firmly and replied, "Only those who haven't understood that every staircase starts at the ground feel shame." That answer went viral. But more than likes, she received letters, hundreds, from cleaning ladies, cooks, stock clerks, janitors, delivery workers. People who had never felt seen. Who, for the first time, felt represented. It was then that she understood. Her greatest show wasn't on the runway. It was inside the mind of someone who, for the first time, believed they could too. She began investing in social projects, created scholarships for women coming from invisible jobs, supported young entrepreneurs, funded ideas with more heart than resume. Because she knew talent doesn't always come wrapped in a diploma, her success kept growing, but she wasn't in a hurry. She preferred to plant slowly so she could harvest with roots. Because she learned that what rises too fast usually can't withstand the first storm. Her brand became a reference. But her greatest pride was seeing former employees creating their own designs. It was seeing that her victory had become a multiplier. And that no trophy could measure. She was honored at a global event. She walked on stage wearing a dress created by one of the students from her social project. She said just one sentence. "This dress is more important than any award, because I once inspired the woman who made it." On the way back home, she sat on the studio porch and looked at the sky. She remembered the dirty floors of the factory, remembered the heavy boxes, remembered the unspoken conversations. And she gave thanks. Because everything she lived had made her exactly who she was. She no longer felt anger or resentment. She felt responsibility. Because she understood that sometimes God allows you to walk through the dark just so He can use your light to guide others. One day, she received a letter from Adidas itself, a thank you, an invitation to collaborate on a special collection. She accepted, not for status, but because she knew it would be the chance to restore dignity to many others. In the campaign, she made sure to use real employees as models, showed calloused hands, steady eyes, upright backs, and wrote in the catalog, "Fashion doesn't begin in the studio. It begins in life." She closed a cycle, not with a period, but with courageous commas, because she still wanted to do more, teach more, inspire more. And she knew that as long as someone felt invisible, her work would not be finished. She didn't consider herself an example. She considered herself a process. Her face was in the magazines, but her heart still lived in the first poorly made stitch. She hung up in silence, hoping someone would notice. She wasn't born ready, but she built herself with scraps of rejection and threads of courage. Adidas had been her beginning, but not her ceiling. And now she turned each memory of that factory into strength to go further. The studio kept growing. But what truly grew was the reach of what she represented. The certainty that the impossible only exists until someone dares to begin. She didn't create clothes, she created paths. And you? Have you ever stopped to think that what seems like your limit today might actually be your starting point? If this story touched you, leave it in the comments. What today seems small, but you believe you can transform. Your origin doesn't define you, your courage does.